What I've decided to research is if different lumbering techniques can have neutral or even positive effects on certain ecosystems and the environment as a whole. I'm personally excited to pursue this research as an environmental science major whose long-term dream is to study conservation ecology. And the topic is pretty personal to me because I've kept records and photos of the land around my family's home for several years, but about 3 years ago when my uncle decided to clear cut about 15 acres of the forest, I started to keep very thorough records because I knew extreme changes would happen. So far, the deer populations have moved up north, closer to the rivers, and there's been increases in all kinds of birds from blue jays to turkey vultures. An increase in overall plant diversity was another fascinating transition, and I found some plants there that I'd never seen growing in the community before, and this was just the start of the discoveries I recorded. The most important discovery, though, was of a wild turkey feather, because never in my times of recording the findings of the forest have they ever moved this far west into the forest before. The presence of the turkeys moving into the forest made me question everything I knew about how logging changes ecosystems. Did they perhaps benefit from the forest being easier to navigate? What stopped them from populating the land before the trees were cut? But most importantly, how do we decide what's best for ecosystems in this situation? And these were just a few of my questions. A single feather prompted me to question the functions of every forest ever affected by mankind. How each one is differently affected by deforestation and logging suddenly occurred to me, and this only adds to the complications of protecting them. But ultimately, if each one is affected differently, could that mean that some could experience neutral or positive effects from a certain logging method? The specific things I'll be looking at in my research starts with a timeline, and I've decided 15 years is the most reasonable. The different types of forests my research will focus on may vary on what information I'm able to ultimately find, but my primary focus is on rainforests, national parks, and any other forests that offer distinct evidence that supports if logging can have benefits or not. As for whom this information generally concerns, I hope I'm able to stress that even though I'm focusing my opinions on foresters, loggers, scientists, and maybe even businesses, people not only globally but in some communities more than others are heavily affected by forest management, and their lives and health should be considered. While looking at these individual aspects, I'll also be considering effects of pollution, human health, ecological diversity, and sustainability, soil degradation, and any other relevant long-term effects. Within those specific aspects I mentioned, there is unsurprisingly a lot of debates, such as the debate of the possibility of neutral or positive logging effects, including the argument that by having a harmless effect on one thing, it's likely having a more harmful effect to something else as a trade-off. Another debate would be that it isn't enough to justify the overall stress on the environment that logging causes. Another debate, for example, would be the new sustainable forestry techniques can help relieve certain forests of stress and damage of logging, but I've also noticed several articles question the effectiveness of sustainable forestry. And these are just a few of the opposing viewpoints I've found without even tackling pollution or biodiversity yet. With a combination of prior knowledge and research, I'm familiar with the broad effects of large-scale deforestation and how it negatively impacts the environment. By clear-cutting trees, the soil loses its primary source of nutrients, and it's susceptible to soil erosion, and animals lose their habitats, forcing them into competition, migration, extirpation, and maybe even extinction. Pollution is another known factor of mass logging because without trees, water and air are generally exposed to higher amounts of contaminants. And something like the climate change brought on by the increases of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is something that affects all of us. It's true that cutting down trees causes a lot of negative impacts, but I think that we can lessen the severity of those impacts by encouraging more studies and implementation of sustainable forestry. Even though humans have become dependent on lumber, sustainable forestry can help lessen the overall harm of it. I can't stress enough that it is a problem that concerns everyone, and it may not affect us all equally, but because we are all being impacted by this in some way or another, we should all find some importance in the topic. Long-term effects to the earth by logging should be our priority focus because soil quality and degradation, thinning of the atmosphere, and increasing pollution in the air and water are just a few of the effects we're looking at. Drastic changes to the environment itself need to be another priority because drastic climate change is happening, permanent habitat destruction, and extinction of species are all irreparable. and it will only continue to get worse if we don't start making major strides to change it now. While there is a lot I still need to learn about logging effects, the main thing I want to learn about is specific types of logging and how each one of them impacts certain ecosystems differently. Most of my questions on the topic still focus whether sustainable forestry is a manageable goal or not, and how do we decide what's important to implement depending on the specific plants and animals of a certain forest. Hopefully my research can help answer these questions as well as pose some new ones to think about.